Good evening. Tonight's presentation surrounds the project for this term, which for me is a review of literature surrounding how student voice has been identified via visual narrative. As we move through the presentation, the images you see are actually images captured by students during these visual research or visual narrative research projects. So, again, the purpose of this literature review seeks to explore the ways in which visual narrative methods have been utilized to surface student voices in an effort to empower student voice as a valuable source of information for supporting efforts to improve student school experiences. Essentially, why is student voice important, and how is visual-based narrative used to document and analyze students' lived experiences? To start, we'll define visual-based narrative. Kim defines this as storytelling research that uses visual methods such as images, in the case of these studies, photographs. It can also include drawings, paintings, collages, cartoons, film, any of these visual technology methods. She goes on to further define photo voice as a method that relies on images that are produced by the informants. Participants essentially take photographs of their lives and tell the stories behind the photographs in order to share their lived experiences in different ways. Moss, Depler, Atsley, and Pattison, in their 2007 article, actually notated differing research possibilities and focus between these two terms. However, in many articles, they're used somewhat interchangeably. Student voice has been defined as a form of participation whereby adults listen to students and students in turn take a more active role in their learning process in order to improve their schools. It goes beyond simply listening and actually includes student participation in the change process, which serves to increase their sense of ownership and community within the school. It's also been defined as a form of consultation that involves listening to students regarding matters that impact their lives. The focus on student voice is connected with the idea that children and young people are individuals with rights, more akin to what we would think of as consumers with valuable opinions, as opposed to simply vessels that are waiting to be filled with the knowledge and skills so that one day as an adult they can have an opinion. Research has shown that student voices can be highly useful as a source of information for driving school improvement, and this all rests on the assumption that students have the capacity to serve as expert witnesses of what quality instruction is and what supportive school environments look like. Their insight and suggestions provide information that serves to make schools more effective, to improve the culture and the relationships across the campus. Attending to student voice serves to empower students to use their experiential knowledge to help identify the most effective instructional practices and advancement plans for schools and campuses. Briefly, we'll go over the articles that were reviewed. The first, by Nind, Borman, and Clark, was a UK study that used visual narrative methods to surface and analyze what female students with behavioral, emotional, and social difficulties identified as inclusive and exclusive experiences and environments on campus. The biggest difference with this study is it tended to focus on the personal benefit to the students that they gained through the research process. How they were able to better analyze their perceptions and create more socially inclusive environments on campus. The next, by Bergmark and Kostenius, was a Swedish study that explored students' positive educational experience through visual narratives. This study served to highlight how school personnel can actually use this insight to create more positive learning experiences for their students. In Biag's article, this was a U.S. study that visually explored how low-income students in an urban California middle school with a very high minority student population, how these students characterize safe and unsafe locations on campus. It was aimed to develop a deeper understanding of the social, spatial, and temporal forces that influence students' perceptions of school safety. with the goal of using that information to actually guide administrative decision-making as to how to make the campus both actually more safe in reality and to feel more safe to students. The next by Moss, Depler, Atley, and Pattison. This was an Australian visual narrative study exploring how students perceive and categorize inclusive and exclusive spaces on campus. This study looked to highlight how visual methods can improve a deeper understanding of students' experiences and knowledge of schooling, as opposed to simply written or verbal narrative. The Carrington, Allen, and Osmolowski article was another Australian study that used visual narrative to explore students' perceptions of inclusion and exclusion. This study included students' views of their social, cultural, and political environments, again with the intention of creating a more socially just school atmosphere. So there were some consistent trends across all of the articles. All were part of larger multi-method case studies looking at wider issues of school performance. All utilized photographic narrative methods combined with participant interviews in order to more completely analyze the information provided by the student participants. All focused on the experiences of middle school students or the equivalent age for the educational system being examined. Also, all focused on listening to student voice and empowering student opinions in the research and school improvement process in order to guide improvements on the school and on the personal level for the students. There were some differences. Each study actually examined slightly different aspects of the students' lived experiences, from perceptions of safety, positive learning experiences, inclusive, socially just environments, etc. There were also differing geolocations. 2 of these were from Australia, and 1 each from the US, Sweden, and the UK. The participants were chosen from diverse groups of students, including both mainstream, gifted, ethnic minority, and students identified with behavioral and/or emotional difficulties. And all the studies presented slightly different methodological and theoretical framework vocabulary. They used terms such as participant-employed photography, photo elicitation interviews, mapping, phenomenology of life world, participatory action research, which was more specifically labeled as visual narrative, and ethnographic arts-based image-based research. All of which equated, at least on the surface, to extremely similar research methods. So, when looking at what the next steps for this sort of process would be, we found very little replication, which made it very challenging to find consistent findings directly related to student perceptions and the use of visual narratives. Also, there was no follow-up on whether or not school personnel were willing to not only listen to students' voice, but to also implement changes based on that information. This limited further information regarding success of school improvement measures that were based on student voice. Next step for this area are additional research, including further investigation of students' use of personally created visual artifacts as a means of expressing student voice, and further investigating the effects of changes implemented from input received from students in order to measure how effective the use of student voice is in planning school improvements. Essentially, do student-led changes improve the school experience, and how does visual narrative provide an additional layer of understanding for the student experience? So, again, this is work in progress, so I would certainly welcome any comments, questions, suggestions for directions for how to complete this paper. I appreciate your attention tonight, and I hope you found the information useful.